Good afternoon, everyone. Rather than dwell on the reality that Bryan Murray has left us, I prefer to focus on what Bryan Murray has left with us. He has left us with an appreciation of the places that sheer determination can carry you. And he has left us with an admiration for his humanity and dignity in the face of a dreaded disease. The path he chose once he received his diagnosis in 2014 was to respond with grit, with class, and with courage. Bryan was a student of our game and a teacher of life, and he never stopped teaching. While it may have been too late for him, Bryan Murray, a team player to the end, did all he could to make sure to raise awareness for colon cancer so that thousands of people he never met might be saved. His message to all was get checked, and my sincere hope is everyone will honor Bryan's life and his advice. Bryan was quoted as saying, "We're almost invincible, and then we find out that we're not." When Bryan was young, all he wanted to do was play for the senior team in Shawville, a team that he admired as a youth so much. A modest goal, but it led to a remarkable result. He wanted to join the men who played for the love of the game. They didn't play hockey for money. They all had full-time jobs. He marveled at their work ethic, their commitment to hockey, their toughness off the ice, which translated almost naturally to their toughness on the ice. Bryan's dream was to join those men, and he realized it. One hockey dream among many that Bryan was able to make real. He was barely a teenager when that happened, and the men on the team looked after him. They made sure that nobody messed with him. And whatever team he was with after that, Bryan made sure that the veterans did the same thing for the kids on his team. Ultimately, Bryan would find his place in the NHL. And look at his NHL map: Washington, Detroit, Florida, Anaheim, and of course, Ottawa. In every one of those places, Bryan was an agent of change, creating order, usually from chaos or underperformance, orchestrating success where there had been little, if any. When he hired Bryan to coach his team in 1981, Washington owner Abe Poland said, quote, "My gut tells me that Bryan Murray's the guy that's going to bring the Capitals out of the doldrums." Abe was correct. In his first full season, 1982-83, Bryan coached the Capitals to a 29-point improvement. Mike Ilitch was correct when he hired Bryan for the Red Wings in 1990. From Bryan's first season to his last year, the team improved by 27 points. Wayne Huizenga and Bill Torrey were right when they hired Bryan in Florida for the Panthers, and a third-year expansion team would go to the Stanley Cup final. Michael Eisner was right when he hired Bryan for the team then known as the Mighty Ducks of Anaheim, and they go to the Stanley Cup final with a coach Bryan promoted to his first NHL head coaching job, Mike Babcock. And Eugene Melnick was right when he hired Bryan for the Senators. Bryan again goes to the Stanley Cup final in 2007 when the Senators lost to, as you heard before, to the Ducks team that Bryan helped stock with such players as Ryan Getzlaf and Corey Perry. Every one of those owners saw that Bryan could create and provide the structure and the chemistry, assemble the skill, and instill the discipline that is necessary to compete and succeed. And Bryan had a remarkable capacity, obviously, to get along with all different types of owners. Not always easy, believe me, I know. If you look back at all the rosters, his teams weren't necessarily all-star teams, but in many instances, they achieved great things because of the closeness and chemistry Bryan helped build in the dressing room. Bryan ran teams in the ultimate sense of the word team, and he always tried to make his teams better. In a sense, he was a hockey artist. In Detroit, he obtained Dino Ciccarelli and Paul Coffey in trades and picked up Chris Draper for $1. In Florida, he traded again for Ciccarelli, made a blockbuster deal for Pavel Bure, Bryan likes scorers, and obtained Roberto Luongo to anchor in goal. In Ottawa, he traded for Craig Anderson, Kyle Turris, Bobby Ryan, and Dion Phaneuf. The way his teams played reflected the way Bryan approached the game: earnest, honest, and hardworking. They were a tough night as an opponent. They had an attitude about them reflecting the personality of their boss. Bryan once said, "When I played sports, I was always the guy who had the biggest mouth." He also had the biggest heart. The man loved the game, loved the people in it, and far and wide that affection was returned. In 2008, when the draft was in Ottawa, Bryan traded first-round draft picks with Nashville GM David Poile, who you just saw in the video. The Senators moved up 3 spots and used the pick, announced from the stage by then-captain Daniel Alfredsson on what would be their future captain, Erik Karlsson. In 2011, Murray and Poile made another deal. This time, Bryan sent to Nashville the Predators' future captain, Mike Fisher, a life-changing move for Fisher and his wife, who had been commuting between Ottawa and Nashville. In a piece for the Players Tribune, Mike Fisher wrote, "Eugene and Bryan agreed to make sure that my destination would be Nashville. They could have traded me anywhere, but they were genuinely looking out for me and my family. That's what makes hockey such a special sport, even at the NHL level. Yes, it's a business, but the amount of good human beings I've run across in this sport is just incredible." Bryan was truly one of those good human beings. Bryan also loved the liquid hockey rituals: coffee in the morning before practice and a beer in the evening once the game had been played and there were details to review and stories to tell. He loved mentorship, helping to shape the GM careers of, among others, Pierre Dorian, Chuck Fletcher, Tim Murray, and Steve Yzerman. Bryan was a fierce competitor, but from the league standpoint, he was always the consummate professional. His voice at countless general managers' meetings he attended was insightful, knowledgeable, and most of all respected by his colleagues. Perhaps as important, he could disagree, even complain, perhaps even over an occasional officiating call, but after making his point or expressing his complaint, always in a civil tone, he would move on. For Bryan, bad feelings never lingered. Bryan once said, quote, "The ultimate achievement in sport is to be recognized at the very top of the game. And I know that winning a cup is the ultimate goal for all of us, and it's a great achievement. But I think when you help develop people, influence people, do things for the game, in the game, be involved in your community, those are all the things that may be just as important." Bryan Murray lived those words and leaves us with that legacy. While we already miss him, Bryan's wisdom, his uncomplaining courage, and the lessons he taught will be with us as long as players chase the puck in rinks all around the world. Bryan, we mourn your loss, but we celebrate your life and all you gave to us and to our game.